Welcome to Story Hour. The book I am reading today is King Arthur for Boys. It is from 1929, the Salfield Publishing Company, and it was written by Henry Gilbert. Chapter 1. How Arthur was made king and won his kingdom. In the hall of his Roman palace at London, King Uther, Pendragon of the island of Britain, lay dying. He had been long sick with a wasting disease and forced to lie in his bed, gnawing his beard with wrath at his weakness, while the pagan Saxons ravaged up and down the fair broad lands, leaving in their tracks the smoking ruin of broken towns and desolate villages, where mothers lay dead beside their children on the hearths. Fair churches stood pillaged and desecrated, and priests and nuns wandered in the wilds. At length, when the pagans, bold and insolent, had ventured near London, the king had been able to bear his shame and anguish no longer. He had put himself in a litter at the head of his army, and meeting the fierce, brave pagans at Verulam, now called St. Albans, he had, in battle, day long and stubborn, forced them at length to fly with heavy slaughter. That was 3 days ago, and since then he had been lain in his bed as still as if he were dead, and beside him sat the wise wizard Merlin, white with great age, and in his eyes the calmness of deep learning. It was the third night when the king suddenly awoke from his stupor and clutched the hand of Merlin. "I have dreamed," he said in a low, shaken voice. "I have seen 2 dragons fighting, one white, the other red. First, the white dragon got the mastery and clawed with iron talons the red one's crest, and drove him hither and thither into holes and crannies of the rocks. And then the red one took heart, and with a fury that was marvelous to see, he drove and tore the white dragon full terribly, and anon the white one crawled away sore wounded. And the red dragon walked up and down in the place of his triumph, and grew proud, and fought smaller red dragons and conquered. Thus for a long time he stayed, and was secure and boastful. Then I saw the white dragon return with a rage that was very terrible, and the red dragon fought with him, but his pride had softened him, so he drew off. Then the red dragons came upon him in his wounds and beat him sore, which seeing, the white dragon dashed upon them all, and I awoke. Merlin, tell me what this may mean, for my mind is sore distraught with the vision." Then Merlin looked at the trembling king, wasted with disease, and in his wise heart was great pity. "It means, Lord," he said in slow, grave tones, "that thy people shall conquer, that a red dragon shall rise from thy kin, who shall drive out the loathsome pagan, and shall conquer far and wide, and his fame shall go into all lands and for all time." "I thank thee, Merlin, for thy comfort," sighed the wearied king. "I have feared me these last years that the pagan will at the last drive my people into the western sea, and that the name of Christ shall die out of this fair land, and the foul pagan possess it. But thy words give me great heart." "Nay, sir," said Merlin, "take comfort. Great power will come to this people in a near time, and they shall conquer all their enemies." Anon the king slept and lay thus for 3 further days, neither speaking nor moving. Many great lords and barons came craving to speak with Merlin, asking if the king were not better. But looking into their crafty eyes and seeing there the pride and ambitions of their hearts, Merlin knew that they wished the king were already dead. For all thought that King Uther had no son to take the kingdom after him, and each great baron, strong in men, plotted to win the overlordship when the king should be gone. "If he dieth and saith not which he shall name to succeed him," some asked, "say, Merlin, what's to be done?" I shall tell you, said Merlin. Come ye all into this chamber tomorrow's morn, and if God so wills, I will make the king speak. Next morn, therefore, came all the great barons and lords into the high hall of the palace, and many were the proud and haughty glances passing among them. There was King Lot of Orkney, small and slim, with his dark narrow face and crafty eyes under pent eyebrows. King Uriens of Reged, tall and well-seeming, with grim eyes war-wise, fresh from the long harrying of the fleeting pagans. King Mark of Tintagel, burly of form, crafty and mean of look. King Nantris of Garlet, ruddy of face, blusterous of manner, who tried to hide cunning under a guise of honesty. And many others, as Duke Camembert of Noides, King Brandergoris of Strangor, King Morkant of Strathlyde, King Clarience of Northumberland, King Cador of Cornwall, and King Idris of Silura. Now when all these were assembled about the bed of Uther, Merlin went to the side of the sleeping king and looked long and earnestly upon his closed eyes. Anon he passed his hands above the face of the king, and Uther instantly awoke and looked about him as if startled. Lord, said Merlin, God's hand is drawing you to him, and these your lords desire you to name your successor ere you pass from life. Is it not your desire that your son Arthur shall take the kingdom after you with your blessing? Those who craned towards the bed started and looked darkly at Merlin, and then at each other, for none had heard of the son whom the wizard named Arthur. Then in the deep silence the dying king raised his hand in the sign of blessing, and in a hollow whisper said, Such is my desire. With God's blessing I wish my son Arthur to take this kingdom after me, and all that love me must follow him. His eyes closed. A shiver passed down the tall frame as it lay beneath the clothes, and with a sigh the soul of Uther sped. In a few days the king was buried in all solemnity with the dead of his kindred in the Roman temple that had been made a church, where now stands St. Paul's. Thereafter men waited and wondered, for the land was without a king, and none knew who was rightfully heir to the throne. As the days went by, men gathered in groups in the marketplace of London, whispering the rumors that mysteriously began to fly from mouth to mouth, how King Lot of Orkney and Lothian was gathering his knights and men-at-arms, and King Uriens and Duke Camembert of Loides had got together a great host, although the remnant of the pagans had fled the country. The faces of the citizens went gloomy as they thought of the griefs of civil war, of the terror, of the sack of cities, the ruin of homes, the death of dear ones, and the loss of riches. Nevertheless, some were already wagering which of the great lords would conquer the others and take to himself the crown of Britain and the title of Pendragon. As it neared the feast of Christmas, men heard that the Archbishop of London, who was then chief ruler of the church, had sent his letters to each and all of the great nobles, bidding them to a great council at the church of St. Paul at Christmas. When men heard that this was done by the advice of Merlin, faces lightened and looked more joyful. Now shall things go right, said they, for the old Merlin hath the deepest wisdom of all the earth. On Christmas Eve, the city throbbed with the clank of arms and the tramp of the great retinues of princes, kings, and powerful lords who had come at the archbishop's summons. And by day and night, the narrow ways were crowded with armed men. Long ere the dawn of Christmas Day, the lords and the common people betook themselves along the wide road which led across to the church, which then stood in a wide space amid fields, and all knelt therein to mass. While it was yet dark, a great strange cry rang out in the churchyard. Some ran forth, and there by the wall behind the high altar they saw a vast stone foursquare, that had not been there before, and in the middle thereof was stuck a great wedge of steel, and sticking therefrom by the point was a rich sword. On the blade were written words in Latin, which a clerk read forth, which said, Whoso pulleth this sword out of this stone and wedge of steel is rightwise born king of all Britain. The clerk ran into the church and told the archbishop, and men were all amazed and would have gone instantly to see this marvel. But the archbishop bade them stay. Finish your prayers to God, he said, for no man may touch this strange thing till high mass be done. When mass was finished, all poured forth from the church and thronged about the stone and marveled at the words on the sword. First King Lot, with a light laugh, took hold of the handle and essayed to pull out the point of the sword, but he could not, and his face went hot and angry. Then King Nantries of Garlot took his place with a jest, but though he heaved at the sword with all his burly strength till it seemed like to snap, he could not move it, and so let go at last with an angry oath. All the others essayed in like manner, but by none was it moved a jot, and all stood about discomfited, looking with black looks at one another and the stone. He that is right wise born ruler of Britain is not here, said the archbishop at length, but doubt not he shall come in God's good time. Meanwhile let a tent be raised over the stone, and do ye lords appoint 10 of your number to watch over it, and we will essay the sword again after New Year's Day. So that the kings and lords should be kept together, the archbishop appointed a great tournament to be held on New Year's Day on the waste land north of the city, which men now called Smithfield. Now when the day was come, a certain lord, Sir Ector de Morven, who had great lands about the island of Thorney, rode toward the jousts with his son Sir Kay, and young Arthur, who was Sir Kay's foster brother. When they had got nearly to the place, suddenly Sir Kay bethought him that he had left his sword at home. Do you ride back, young Arthur, he said, and fetch me my sword, for if I do not have it, I may not fight. Willingly Arthur turned his horse and rode back swiftly. But when he had arrived at the house, he found it shut up, and none was within, for all had gone to the jousts. Then was he a little wroth, and rode back wondering how he should obtain a sword for his foster brother. Suddenly, as he saw the tower of St. Paul's Church through the trees, he bethought him of the sword in the stone. When he came to the churchyard, he tied his horse to the stile, and went through the grave mounds to the tent wherein was the sword. He found the place unwatched, and the flashing sword was sticking by the point in the stone. Lightly he grabbed the handle of the sword with one hand, and it came forth straightway. Then, glad that his brother should not be without a sword, he swiftly gat upon his horse, and rode on, and delivered the sword to Sir Kay, and thought no more of aught but the splendid knights and richly garbed lords that were at the jousts. But Sir Kay looked at the sword and the writing, and knew it was the sword of the stone, and marveled how young Arthur had possessed himself thereof, and being of a covetous and sour mind, he thought how he might make advantage for himself. He went to his father Sir Ector, and said, Lo, father, this is the sword of the stone, and surely am I rightful king. Sir Ector knew the sword and marveled, but his look was stern as he gazed into the crafty eyes of his son. Come ye with me, he said, and all three rode to the church and alit from their horses and went in. Sir Ector strode up the aisle to the altar, and turning to his son, said sternly, Now swear on God's book and the holy relics how thou didst get this sword. Sir Kay's heart went weak, and he stammered out the truth. How gat you this sword? Asked Sir Ector of Arthur. Sir, I will tell you, said Arthur, and so told him all that had happened. Sir Ector marveled what this should mean, for Arthur had been given to him to nourish and rear as a weak old child by Merlin, but the wizard had only told him that the babe was a son of a dead lady whose lord had been slain by the pagans. Then Sir Ector went to the stone and bade Arthur put back the sword into the wedge of steel, which the young man did easily. Thereupon Sir Ector strove with all his strength to draw the sword forth again, but though he pulled till he sweated, he could not stir the sword. Now you essay it, he said to his son, but naught that Sir Kay could do availed. Now you try, he bade Arthur. Arthur lightly grasped the handle with one hand, and the sword came out without hindrance. Therewith Sir Ector sank to his knees, and Sir Kay also, and they bared their heads. Alas, said Arthur, my own dear father and brother, why kneel ye so to me? Nay, nay, my lord Arthur, it is not so, said Sir Ector, for I was never your father. I wot well ye are of higher blood than I weened, for Merlin delivered you to me while yet ye were a babe. The tears came into Arthur's eyes when he knew that Sir Ector was not his father, for the young man had loved him as if he were of his own blood. Sir, said Ector unto Arthur, will ye be my good and kind lord when ye are king? Ah, if this be true as ye say, cried Arthur, ye shall desire of me whatsoever ye may, and I shall give it to you. Sir, said Sir Ector, I crave a boon of you, that while you live your foster brother, Sir Kay, shall be high seneschal of all your lands. That shall be done, and never man shall have that office but him, while he and I live. Then hastily Sir Ector rode to the archbishop, and told him how and by whom the sword had been achieved from the stone. Thereupon the archbishop let call a great meeting on 12th day of all the kings and barons. So on the day appointed all men gathered in the churchyard of St. Paul's, and the tent was removed from about the stone. From day dawn to the evening the kings and princes and lords strove each in his turn to draw the sword from the stone, but none of them availed to move it. While they stood about, dark of look, gnawing their lips with rage and disappointment, the archbishop turned privily to Sir Ector and bade him bring Arthur. The young man came, quietly clad in a tunic of brown samite of medium height, with curly hair, above a fair face of noble though mild mien. As he came among the richly clad nobles, they looked haughtily at him, and wondered who he was and why he came, for as yet none had been told that the sword had been drawn by him. The archbishop, tall, white-haired, and reverend, called Arthur to him and said in grave tones, My son, I have heard a strange tale of thee, and whether it be true or false, God shall decide. Now, therefore, do ye take hold upon this sword and essay to draw it from the stone. The proud barons, some with looks amazed and others with sneering laughter, pressed about the young man as he stepped towards the stone. Arthur took the handle of the sword with his right hand, and the sword seemed to fall into his grasp. Thereat arose great cries of rage, and angry looks flashed forth, and many a hand went to dagger haft. Ho, Archbishop, cried King Lot, fiercely striding toward the tall ecclesiastic, what wizard's brat are you foisting upon us here to draw this sword by magic? 'Tis a trick, cried Nentries of Garlet, his bluff manner falling from him and all the savage anger gleaming from his eyes, a trick that shall not blind men such as we. Who is this beggar's boy that is put forth to shame us kings and nobles? Said King Mark, and his hand sought his dagger as he disappeared among the crowd and wormed his way towards where stood young Arthur. But Sir Ector and Sir Kay, seeing the threatening looks of all, had quickly ranged themselves beside young Arthur, and with them went Sir Bedivere, Sir Bodwin, and Sir Ulfius, 3 noble lords who had loved King Uther well. Peace, lords, said the old archbishop, calmly meeting the raging looks about him. Ye know what words are about the sword, and this youth hath drawn the sword. I know not of tricks or wizardry, but I think high heaven hath chosen this way of showing who shall be lord of this land. and I think this young man is rightful king of us all." "'Tis some base-born churl's son that the wizard Merlin would foist upon us," cried the barons. "We will have none of him. A shame and dishonor it is, so to try to overrule us, kings and lords of high lineage, with an unknown youth," cried others. "We will have the sword put back and set a watch over it," cried King Uriens, "and we will meet here again at Candlemas and essay the sword. And at that time, my lord Archbishop, thou shalt do the proper rites to exorcise all evil powers, and then we will try the sword once more." So was it agreed by all, and 10 knights watched day and night about the stone and the sword. But it befell at Candlemas, as it had befallen at Twelfth Day, that for all their strength and might none of the kings or barons could draw forth the sword, but into the hand of the unknown Arthur the weapon seemed to fall. Whereat they were all sore aggrieved and rageful, and resolved that they would have yet another trial at Easter. It befell at the feast of Easter as it had befallen before, and this time the kings and lords for angry spite would have fallen upon Arthur and slain him, but the archbishop threatened them with the most dreadful ban of Holy Church. They forbore, therefore, and went aside and declared that it was their will to essay the sword again at the high feast of Pentecost. By Merlin's advice, the young Arthur went never about, unless the 5 friends of Uther were with him, that is to say, Sir Ector and his son Sir Kay, Sir Bedivere, Sir Bodwin, and Sir Ophius. And though at divers times men were found skulking or hiding in the horse stall, the dark wood by the hall, or the bend in the lane, in places where Arthur might pass, no harm came to him by reason of the loving watch of those noble knights. Again, at the feast of Pentecost, men gathered in the churchyard of St. Paul's, and the press of people was such that no man had ever seen the like. Once more the kings and princes and great barons, to the number of 49, came forward, and each in turn pulled and drew at the sword in the stone until the sweat stood on their brows. Nevertheless, though the sword point was but the width of a palm in the stone, not the mightiest of them could move it by the breadth of a hair. Then a cry came from among the common people, and so strong was it that the nobles looked as if they hated to hear it. "Let Arthur draw the sword," was the call from 1,000 throats. The venerable archbishop came and took Arthur by the hand and led him towards the sword. Again the young man held the rich pommel with his single hand, and that which none of the 49 great men could do, he did as easily as if he but plucked a flower. A fierce cry leaped from among the thousands of the common people. "Arthur shall be our king," they cried. "Arthur is our king. We will no longer deny him." Many of the princes and barons cried out with the commons that this was their will also, but 11 of the most powerful and ambitious showed by their arrogant and angry gestures that they refused to own Arthur as their lord. For a long time the uproar raged, the cries of the common folk becoming fiercer and more menacing against the counter-cries of the 11 kings and their adherents. At length, from among the people, there came the governor of London, who, in his rich robes of office, leaped upon the stone where but lately the sword had been. "My lords, I speak the will of the commons," he cried, and at his voice all were silent. "We have taken counsel together, and we will have Arthur for our king. We will put him no more in delay, for we all see that it is God's will that he shall be our king, and who that holdeth against him we will slay." With that he got down from the stone, kneeled before Arthur, put the keys of the city in his hands, and rendered homage unto him. The great multitude kneeled likewise, bowing their bare heads, and cried him mercy because they had denied him so long. Because they feared the great multitude, the 11 kings kneeled with them, but in their hearts was rage and rebellion. Then Arthur took the sword between his hands, and going into the church, he laid it on the high altar, and the archbishop blessed him. Then, since Arthur was as yet unknighted, King Cador of Cornwall, who was brother of King Uther, made him a knight. Standing up in the sight of all the people, lords and commons, Arthur laid his left hand upon the holy relics. Then, lifting up his right hand, he swore that he would be a true king, to stand forth as their ruler in justice and mercy, to keep them from oppression, to redress their wrongs, and to establish right throughout his dominions. When Arthur in his palace at London had received the homage of princes from the lands south of Humber, he appointed his officers. Sir Kay he made seneschal or steward, and Sir Bodwin was made constable, and Sir Ulfias he named chamberlain of his court. By the counsel of Merlin he made Sir Bedivere warden,